Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the 17th All India Conference of China Studies. We are starting the day with the 4th thematic panel titled China and the Geopolitics of Technology. I request the chair and the speakers of this session to please proceed to the stage and take their seats. The panel will be chaired by Professor Arvind Kumar, Center for Canadian, US and Latin American Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Our speakers for this session are Nikhil Guvvadi, Doctoral Scholar, Special Center for National Security Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, who will be speaking on China's dominance in the critical minerals industry, major power responses and counter-responses. Shalini Singh, Doctoral Scholar, Amity Institute of International Studies, Amity University, Noida, who will be joining us online and speaking on Navigating Game Theory Dynamics, China's Strategic Quest for Critical Minerals in a Globalized World. Megha Shrivastava, Dr. TMA Pai Fellow and Doctoral Scholar, Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal, who will be speaking on Examining the State of China's Semiconductor Industry, a Comparative Analysis of Pre- and Post-American Export Control Measures. And finally, we have Subhash Pambu, Doctoral Scholar, Shiv Nadar Institution of Eminence, Delhi NCR, who will be speaking on Monopolizing the Differential Technological Capabilities, the Case of the US Sanctions Regime Against China. For more information regarding our respected speakers, please scan the QR codes on the back of your tags. The speakers will have 12 to 14 minutes to make their presentations. I now hand over the stage to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much and good morning to all. Let me at the outset thank the organizers, more particularly Professor Sadri, Chari and ICS for inviting me to this very important AICCS 17th edition. And this particular session, which I feel very important, and I am very delighted to see younger generation taking into these complex areas for their research. And obviously, I have seen their papers. They really have come up with a lot of good findings in terms of understanding the larger debate which is happening across the globe on critical minerals, the way China really has been unfolding, the way China really has been trying to acquire. So it's going to be certainly a very interesting session. We have 4 speakers. And each of them obviously will speak for 10 to 12 minutes. And then obviously we'll have Q&A, and I will just put some remarks in the last. But in the beginning also, let me at the outset say that since the title is so interesting, China and the Geopolitics of Technology, let me tell you that China really has had a very good journey in terms of acquiring technology. And it is not only through their innovative practices, but also they really worked very closely in the early years with the formerly Soviet Union and the United States. And that perhaps gave them a very strong foundation. The decade of 50s, let me highlight the point which Mao really had made to the members of Politburo, that China cannot afford to get bullied by either of the power blocks. And that was again happened in the year 1955 when, when Mao basically had experienced 2 crises. One was the Korean War and the second was Taiwan States crisis. And the way, in fact, China started their strategic program was really demonstrating to the world that how China's aspiration could be met. 3 programs they started simultaneously. One was the nuclear program in the year 1956. Second was the ballistic missile, the delivery system program. And third was the outer space. And all the 3 programs, if you just see their journey since 1955, as of now, I think they have made tremendous progress. And they really have created their sphere of influence in all these 3 areas. Later on, they really moved into the defense technology, started acquiring the sea-based assets and various other air-based assets and all. But at the same time, their idea of acquiring a strategic technologies for seeing that how best they could really be becoming more assertive. I'm saying assertive, but the transition from assertiveness to really to aggressiveness, that is what is the source of concern for the rest of the world. In the current context, the way the debate really is being shaped on critical minerals is again very interesting. China wants to really be seen as the dominant power in acquiring all the major critical minerals. And obviously, the rest of the world really has been eyeing on China, that how China basically will obviously demonstrate their capability in each and every area of strategic technologies with the help of these critical minerals which they have acquired. So obviously, in fact, we are looking forward to hearing, in fact, all the speakers on these major issues, and obviously we'll see that how best this could really get unfolded. I have seen a couple of articles by Megha on critical minerals. I think he wrote in that India Quarterly, and that was really a very good piece by her. And she basically has demonstrated her interest in this area, so it's very good for the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. So let me at the outset invite Nikhil Guvvadi, who is doctoral scholar, a Special Center for National Security Studies at JNU, New Delhi. Over to you.
Good morning to one and all present here. Today I will be speaking on China's dominance in the critical minerals industry, major power responses and counter responses. First, I'll be giving a brief introduction, or brief background, and then delving into some critical mineral dynamics and to understand how China's dominance works and its strategic implications, for which major power responses and then counter responses of China. These are my research objectives: mapping the critical minerals industry, understand China's dominance of the industry, locating other major powers in the critical minerals supply chain, and charting the policy politics of it. These are my research questions. What makes critical minerals critical? How did China come to dominate the industry? What are the major powers doing to address its dominance? What are China's responses to the de-risking efforts of other major powers? I've taken the case study of USA, European Union, Australia, and India. So coming to the research gap and methodology, most studies focus on the downstream value-added industries and not critical minerals themselves. And this is a qualitative study with historical observation and descriptive research. The independent variable being China's dominance, and the dependent variables being major power responses and again counter responses of China. It is an inductive study with major power government policies and with both primary and secondary sources as well. So coming to the background, I'd like you to bring focus on two data points, which are China dominates the global critical minerals industry, which is 60% of the worldwide production and 85% of processing capacity. According to the International Energy Agency, critical minerals demand is set to increase six-fold by 2030, driven primarily by energy transition and electric mobility goals. Critical minerals are essential for the fourth industrial revolution, being the integration of digital technologies into manufacturing and industrial processes, which also may be called new quality productive forces in China. Of three major industries, which are energy mobility systems, defense and aerospace platforms, and electronic and telecommunications. The concerned minerals which are critical for the industries mentioned earlier, but what makes states to release a list of stated critical minerals or vitamins of strategic industries, as called in China, since the reform era had taken off, are the apprehensions of supply chain disruption in a post-pandemic conflict-stricken world. So what are critical minerals? According to the US National Council report, a critical mineral is a non-fuel mineral that is essential for use and faces considerable supply chain and vulnerabilities. However, just a supply chain risk would not qualify a mineral's criticality. For a mineral to be deemed critical, it must be used in a strategic industry vital to a country's national security. The criticality of minerals is not static and can change over time. This is due to changes in supply and demand, import reliance, and the development of new technologies. India's report on the Committee on Identification of Critical Minerals defines critical minerals as those minerals that are essential for economic development and national security. So these are the common critical minerals that have that the research identified among all the major powers mentioned earlier. Crucial for these four strategic industries, beryllium, titanium, and rare earth elements are vital for precision instruments, armor, and aerospace structures. Rare earth elements are indispensable for advanced military technology, including missile guidance systems, lasers, stealth technology, and other emerging tech in military and energy. Vanadium, lithium, cobalt, and graphite are critical for for the energy sector, particularly in the production of batteries for EVs and energy storage systems. Gallium is used in semiconductors and LEDs, germanium in fiber optics, and tantalum in capacitors and high performance electronic devices. All of them, as you can tell, important for high electronics and communications. Antimony, nickel, niobium, and tungsten are critical for various industrial applications. Nickel is used in stainless steel and superalloys. Niobium in steel and superconducting magnets, and tungsten in cutting tools and wear-resistant materials. This makes them fundamental to the above three industries. Coming to the production and processing, China dominates both of them for antimony, gallium, germanium, graphite, rare earth elements, and tungsten, while having made significant upstream integration of cobalt, lithium, and nickel through investments and acquisitions in foreign resource bases in Africa, South America, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia, and even in North America. Canada, to be specific, effectively creating a dynamic of both monopoly and monopsony. Coming to the drivers of China's dominance, it has come about through a combination of strategic investments, acquisitions, and state-backed initiatives. Active support to its state-owned enterprises and private companies through financial backing, subsidies, and favorable policies like the Going Global strategy, logical extensions of which have been the Belt and Road initiatives and the new Global Development Initiative. This dominance does not arise from some otherworldly foresight that the Chinese leadership has, or as some argue, but by the sheer necessity to support their post-Tiananmen social contract through an export-led economy that has a significant domestic demand for critical minerals, which led them to a near-perfect integration of both the upstream and downstream activities of the industries mentioned, especially in batteries for EVs and energy storage, through both state-owned enterprises and private entities, on which the world's energy transition depends today. Coming to the strategic implications, apart from the ability to influence global prices through its production and purchasing decisions, China has successfully rekindled a geo-economic churn in an extremely interdependent world. The advent of the fourth industrial revolution, driven by high technology and sustainable development concepts such as the green and blue economies, has brought the macro geoeconomic competition to the fore again only after the world wars. It even has the potential to shift the international balance of power, with some serious considerations of de-dollarization happening today. Critical minerals is one of the major arenas where this competition is playing out. The two nation states at the helm of this competition are the USA and China, with China having an edge over the rest. The USA is trying to leverage its alliance and other strategic partners to isolate China as a common belligerent, while China is aiming to maintain its dominance to try and capture the new productive forces of the fourth industrial revolution. The major, the case studies that I've taken are of the USA, EU, Australia, and India. USA has critical minerals agreements with, coming to the responses, has agreements with Japan and European Union. The Inflation Reduction Act provides tax credits for EVs and renewable energy tech manufactured by alternatively sourced critical minerals. It is also leading a 23-member mineral security partnership to friendshore supply chains. Nevertheless, it will be interesting to see how much of it will come to fruition with Chris Wright, a fossil fuel CEO who reportedly drank petrol on live TV to demonstrate that it is not harmful as Trump's new energy secretary. I'm done. The Critical Raw Minerals Act aims to when it comes to the EU, they have a Critical Raw Minerals Act which aims to stimulate domestic production and recycling. They have bilateral agreements with foreign resource bases while being part of the US-led MSP. Australia, also part of the MSP, has bilateral agreements such as the Australia-India Strategic Critical Minerals Investment Partnership and the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative with Japan as well as India. And they're also allocating funds for Australian miners to reduce reliance on an already entrenched China in Australia. India is also part of the MSP and has bilaterals with Australia and Japan, while constituting a public sector undertaking called Kanji Bidesh Limited to explore mining opportunities in South America and Africa, and taking the primary steps to ramp up domestic mining, such as cutting down royalty rates and auctioning mining blocks to investigate R&D for processing. China's countermeasures, coming to China's counter responses, they have been promoting protectionism through export restrictions on rare earth elements and the critical minerals which they have processing monopoly, like gallium and germanium, and processing tech which they have relatively perfected since the 90s. Coming to the conclusion, I would like to say that China's dominance over the critical minerals industry poses significant risks to the global economy and national security of countries heavily dependent on imports from China. In response, major powers like the USA, EU, Australia, and India are addressing this challenge through domestic investments, strategic partnerships, policy updates, and efforts to diversify the supply chain. However, reducing dependence on China is a complex and long-term endeavor. Meanwhile, cooperation between countries and a balanced approach that considers both economic interests and national security concerns will be crucial. As the global competition for critical minerals intensifies, the ability of countries to secure reliable and sustainable supplies will have far-reaching implications for their economic and technological competitiveness and their geopolitical influence. The outcome of this contest will shape the future of industry and the broader global economic and political landscape. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you covered a wide ground, and we'll discuss at the last of this whole session. Now, may I invite Shalini Singh now or later? She is coming online. Yes, okay. Yeah. So now Shalini Singh, she has not been able to make it. She is going to make online presentations. She is a doctoral scholar at Amity Institute of International Studies in Noida in Delhi.
Hello everyone. So my topic is navigating game theory dynamics, China's strategic quest for critical mineral in a globalized world. So starting with China's control over the critical minerals, we can say that China has experienced rampant economic growth and industrialization over the few decades, which has fueled an ever growing demand for critical minerals. These critical minerals are essential for technological advancement, manufacturing, and maintaining economic momentum. Despite possessing significant domestic reserves, China's rapid consumption has outpaced its domestic production, forcing the country to rely heavily on imports and adopt aggressive strategies to secure resources from around the world. So, why China is so much obsessed about critical minerals? First, uh, critical minerals have their own economic significance. They are essential for sustaining industrial output and technological innovations such as electrical vehicle and semiconductors. They are also helpful in producing renewable energy systems, and they are also adding a strategic value to China's economic domination and giving China a geopolitical leverage and a power to influence the global supply chain and economic dependencies. So, China controls over key minerals, including 70% of the global rare earth supply, underscores its strategic upper hand in this domain, affecting both developed and developing nations. I have used prisoner's dilemma in my research to do predictive analysis about race for critical minerals and the response of the stronger party or hegemon or the underdeveloped or developing countries in case they cooperate or defect while dealing with the critical minerals. So, introduce like giving a brief introduction to prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's Dilemma offers a lens to analyze China's resource acquisition strategies. It explores the interplay between cooperation and defection in resource competition. So, in case of cooperations, nations will work together for mutual benefit through fair trade practices and resource sharing agreements. And in case of defection, countries will act unilaterally, pursuing aggressive or coercive strategies, or will deny to cooperate to any agreement which is not actually useful to their country or is harming their country in some way. So, China's acquisition strategies basically include stockpiling, coercive diplomacies, strategic investment, which kind of mirrors prisoners' dilemma's steps, where skepticism and mistrust among players complicate cooperative efforts. So, while applying prisoners' dilemma in international resource competition, uh, when countries will cooperate with China, China will help these countries to either acquire resources or will give them technology to process these resources or will give them processed resources in itself. While if the countries defect, China will use China will use hoarding techniques or impose trade restrictions or like it has done before also. For example, in the case of stockpiling, China has strategically stockpiled critical minerals such as rare earth metals to secure its supply chain and global prices. And including the trade restrictions in 2023, China introduced export restrictions on rare earth and semiconductors as a response to US export controls on advanced technologies. In case of diplomatic coercion, China's infrastructure investment program is spread in around 100 countries. While it presents as a opportunity for economic cooperation, China can also disrupt the supply of their country by disturbing the project they are working on. And apart from that, trade controls, China imposed restrictions on Australia like coal and barley in response for a COVID-19 inquiry. It's an indirect trade control which China imposed, but these type of diplomatic coercion can be used by China to control the supply chains. And apart from that, there has always been reports of territorial claims, aggressive territorial claims by China. So this is also an indirect tactic that China can use in case a country is not cooperating in the critical mineral supply chain. So I have used two cases. In first case, I have taken developed and rapidly developing countries, and the second case is underdeveloped and slowly developing countries. So in case of developed and rapidly developing countries, uh, China competes with developed and rapidly developing nations for critical minerals. Both sides face a choice to either cooperate for mutual benefit or defect for individual gain. Cooperation yields a balanced payoff, fostering trade and resource sharing. However, defection leads to Nash equilibrium marked by mutual distrust and competition and suboptimal outcome for both. If China defects aggressively while others cooperate, it gains upper hand. But if the other defects and sanctions are restrictions, China suffers. This case illustrates the strategic tensions and potential trade-offs in managing resource diplomacy with strong competition. The thing is, in case of rapidly developing and developed nations, they have the choice to either defect and find an alternative to China's critical mineral supply. But in case of slowly developing countries or underdeveloped countries, they don't have any choice but to rather cooperate or comply with all the rules that China is keeping in front of them. So, in the second case, China engages with underdeveloped nations, often sourcing critical minerals. Cooperation involving fair trade investment results in higher payoff for China and moderate payoff for the countries with which it is cooperating. Conversely, if both defects, that results in mutual distrust and disrupted resource flow, harming both the parties. And third, if the underdeveloped country doesn't cooperate with China, it loses a lot of economic benefits and faces economic coercion also. So, what can be done to resolve this issue? So, okay, wait. Yeah. So apart from cooperating with China, what can be done is developing countries share their resources with the developing countries. Developed countries share their resources with the developing countries also. That can help underdeveloping countries in Africa and Latin America and other parts of the world also to reduce their reliance on China and be a part of supply chain if they have the reserves in their country. And also, regional resource sharing agreements can be done to promote cooperation among countries sharing the resource of a specific region. And these agreements should be transparent and not be done under the covers like China does. And there should be a sense of accountability in the developing as well as developed countries. And resource extraction and resource distribution should be done in a way that is not harming the environment as well as the countries which have the resources are also benefiting from it. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini. I think you will be there during Q&A, correct?
Yes, sir.
Good. So may I call upon Megha Shrivastava?
Very good morning, everyone. My topic today is the state of China's semiconductor industry, a comparative analysis of pre and post American control measures. First, why this theme? Recently, a lot of us are talking about semiconductors in the last few years. Of course, there are several reasons. One of the most important reasons that we have is lies in the pandemic era, when vulnerabilities related to the supply chain came up, and several countries started taking measures to securitize their supply chains. Also, USA's technology policy towards China lies at the center of why we are talking about semiconductors. USA has imposed sanctions against China and its chip industry, especially in October 2022. Post that, a popular opinion circulated around is that these sanctions have provided a springboard to China's domestic chip makers and have been driving China towards self-sufficiency. Basically, it means that instead of restricting China from accessing technology, it is further providing incentives to Chinese chip makers to make their own technology. Provoked by this thought, my paper aims to examine how China's ongoing churnings have been transforming China's policy landscape. Basically, what has been happening, what has changed in China's semiconductor industry post these sanctions, my aim is to examine that. The major gap is that here and there it has been talked about what are the implications of these sanctions, but a comparative analysis is currently lacked in the literature. Looking at that, there are two questions that I examine in my paper. First, what is the nature and impact of US sanctions on China's chip industry? Secondly, I will look at how China is adapting to this new normal. What are the policies and strategies that the country is adopting to face these sanctions? Doing that, this paper contributes to understanding some key trends that are going on in the industry, some transformations that have occurred, what are the drivers and diversifications among these transformations. First, looking at what is a global chip supply chain and why it remains complicated, why is this controversy? So you see three rectangular boxes here. First, design, fabrication, and assembly, testing, and packaging. These are the three stages in which chips are manufactured. The circle boxes are the chip point technologies, that is, IP and ADS softwares are required for design, manufacturing, chemicals and wafers are required. For fabrication, manufacture chemicals are required. For assembly, testing, and packaging, again, equipment and chemicals all are required. Why it remains complicated? Because it does not limit itself to a particular country. There are several countries which handles different nodes in the supply chain. For example, Netherlands ASML is the sole producer of advanced equipments. United States specializes in design. China has good ATP facilities. Taiwan has most sophisticated foundry model. Japan specializes in gases and chemicals. Also, South Korea is there, which specializes in EDA model. First, we look at what is the position of China in this supply chain. I'll shortly look at this data that when it comes to market share and design, it remains very minimal. When it comes to fabrication, domestically it is dominated by non-Chinese companies, but there are some good foundries as well in China, for example, SMIC. When it comes to equipment, this remains really vulnerable, that is 2% in the global market share. When it comes to ATP, it is decent, that is 20% of the global market share. So equipment we see is the major limitation that China has in the global supply chain. First, I'll examine the chip policies before 2022. This paper does not mean to say that China did not face any problems or challenges before this phase, but I'm taking this phase just because in October 2022, main export control measures were imposed on China by the US. So before this period, China's semiconductor industry was running through on state-led entrepreneurship model. It later transformed into a state-led funding model. Wherein there's this IC fund that is called Big Fund. Data are here on the screen. That is in 2024 and 29, these are the differences that how they raised their funding. They announced several fabs. Also, 70% of demand they targeted that they want to meet through domestic production by 2025. This tells us that even before the sanctions, China was trying or aiming at self-reliance, achieving self-reliance. It's not only after the sanctions. key strategies they adopted it, they want to rely on developing key firms, basically pushing some firms amongst the top firms in the world, especially in the foundry model. They relied on foreign talent and foreign acquisitions. In the pre-sanctions phase, if you look at the short-term and long-term goals, the data is on the screen that fabrication equipment target was this. Nanometer is a scale on the node which tells us that what is the processing capabilities of a chip. Basically, if the figure is more, it is a lagging edge technology. If the figure is coming down, that is 9 nm or 7 nm, it has better processing capabilities. It is an advanced chip. So currently the figure is 3828 nm when it comes to fabrication equipment, 6545 nm. Long-term goal was that they thought that it's nice if they have at least one IC company in the top world's top foundries. They wanted to invest $150 billion and they wanted to catch up with the competitor. These are some data related to China's semiconductor in the pre-sanctions phase. If we look at the annual sales of China in the semiconductor industry, it was consistently rising till 2021, and there's a slight decline, major decline in the year 2022. When it comes to China's share in the global semiconductor production, despite this challenging phase, instead of declining, it rose from 5% to 7%. If we look at the market, semiconductor equipment market size, it was consistently rising from 2018 to 2022. I took all this data by studying several years of Semiconductor Industry Association fact book. I'll quickly run through US tech policies towards China, which led to export control measures, starting with the Trump 1.0 era, when China was declared as a strategic threat. Then trade war, several regulations imposed, entity list was brought up, several countries were put into this entity list. Terms like keeping away versus running faster, small yard high fence, this came up during Biden or also called Sullivan Doctrine. They also involved their allies in their strategy. On your screen, there's a timeline of these sanctions, and towards the left there is the nature that which are trade tariffs, which are export sanctions, and what are the campaigns that they launched along with the allies. One of the most important of these sanctions are the export control measures, which were introduced in October 2022 and hereinafter revised in 2023. Looking at what changes are being, we can see here in the post 2022 phase is that they introduced the third rounding of their big fund, which see a massive jump. From $24 billion, they have doubled down to $48 billion, which also seems to be matching with USA's figure that they invest under the US Chips and Science Act. They want to prioritize indigenization of supply chains. They have come up with huge tax exemptions, that is $20 billion. The fabrication target, we see it has come down to 9 nm to 5 nm. In the previous slide, I showed facts quoting 38 nm. They still want to boost domestic chip production by 70%. If we analyze the evolving landscape, it tells us that the focus is now on choke point technologies instead of building foundries. The competition with foreign firms has intensified. Now they think, earlier those were nice to have goals, but now they are emphasizing on de-Americanization of their supply chain. They focus on building comprehensive AI value chain and not only focusing on a particular segment, for example, foundry in the pre-sanctions phase. They now focus on process technology capabilities, for example, high bandwidth chips. Those are HBM chips. If we, answering the question that how China is navigating this challenging landscape, I've come up with 4 key points that what are the strategies it is adopting. First, when it comes to introducing any sanction or restriction, the first thing that you'll see is the other party will change the one technology with another technology. So restricting access, example, China has developed a 7nm chip using DUV machines, that is manufacturing equipment, instead of EUV for the same product which TSMC has used. There are shell companies. In yesterday's address, Professor Nalapat highlighted that decoupling is not working because of the emergence of various shell companies. So this is happening in China. If SMIC is listed or banned by USA, does not mean that SMIC is not getting the product. There are various shell companies which are acting on behalf of SMIC. Third, there are loopholes. A basic loophole lies in assuming that if you restrict the technology under a particular threshold, that will not get transferred further. But China has acquired parts of various tech which are potentially be used in the manufacturing of advanced chips. Fourth, the role of US allies itself has not been very effective. I can quote an example from USA only because NVIDIA seems to have exported chips which have ultimately helped China's AI development by downgrading the particular chip. So what China is doing is they are using the lagging edge technology to refurbish it and to produce leading edge technologies. Looking at the data in the post-sanctions phase, when we look at the market size, it is consistently rising, it is not stopping. This tells us that the sanctions are not working in its best, as the Americans assume. So market size in the global industry has increased to 7.5, starting from 5% 5 years back. Domestic market size has also increased. When it comes to equipment, in like last year, there was a 93% surge in the import of equipments. ASML also has doubled its sales in 2023. This again tells us that ASML as an ally of USA has not been very effective. SMIC has also achieved its second highest revenue, that is 19% year-on-year rise. Though there are some challenges, I do not want to present a flowery picture of China's semiconductor industry. There have been cases of corruption. There have been various firms and startups that have been shut down. The main findings of my paper, that is the comparison between the two phases, brings an analysis that when in terms of policy direction, now the focus is towards earlier the focus was on foundry, now it is on new segments. For example, now China is focusing on memory market. It is also it is targeting to produce silicon carbide chips, semiconductor equipment companies. So these are the three new segments which have come into the focus of China's chip policies. Also, the main goal earlier was to advance its place in the global supply chain. Now there is an urgency to reduce dependency on foreign players. Market size, earlier it was rising, today also it is rising. Investment has spread across all production steps earlier, but now it is concentrated in choke point technologies, as I highlighted earlier. The financial support earlier remained good, but moderate, but now it has been doubled down, as you saw the figures in the previous slides. Earlier, the domestic environment was very competitive, but after the export controls, there is a lot of synergy. That is, larger companies are supporting smaller companies. For example, Huawei has come up with its investment vehicle called Hubble, which is encouraging other chip companies to advance towards self-sufficiency. When it comes to major finding, I have focused on, or I've come up with 4 trends that are emerging in the industry. First of all, we do not know how sustainable this growth or this picture is. Maybe 5 years down the line, the figures may not be the same. So far, China has been relying on inventories that they have had. Once they run down, the picture may not be the same. Secondly, now they focus on long-term leap and enhancing long-term resilience in the value chain. Thirdly, they focus on high-end technology which equip their AI development end-to-end and not only on a particular foundry model. The solution that China has come up with is creating greater domestic synergies and encouraging companies not only through state funding but also standing up bigger companies to support smaller companies. That's the end of it. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Megha, for making a comprehensive presentation. Now I call upon Subhas to make his presentation.
Can I use this? Thank you. Okay. Good morning. I am Subhash Bambu from Shivnada University, and I will be presenting my paper titled as Monopolizing the Differential Technological Capabilities, the Case of US Sanction Against China. I will proceed the presentation as follows. I will start with the key argument and assumption of my paper, followed by outlining framework and approach. The next segment will be dealing with the literature review around economic sanction, and then appraisal of the discussion around the topic. This will be followed by the describing China's experience of technological denial during the 19th century Imperial Britain and the modern US sanction as to deny key sites of technological know-how. I will complete the presentation with few concluding remarks. The paper attempts to situate the US-led sanction against China along the line of global North-South divide. It argues that the US sanction against China signify more than just the game of technological dominance over the one another. Instead, it reveals how the politics of knowledge production and control of technological knowledge in particular is used by the state of the global North to reinforce inequalities. Taking a longer duty approach, the paper examined the exclusionary practice of knowledge exchange during the 19th century Imperial Britain to the modern American economic sanction, where the need to monopolize knowledge has both become a point of attack and a weapon. The case of China reveals how the US attacked and later weaponized the differential technological capabilities vis-a-vis China. The goal is to contribute the deeper understanding of the economic security nexus by drawing on to Kochian historical structure framework. So coming to the framework, Robert Cox asserts that theories are always for someone and for some purpose. In terms of their purpose, theories can either serve as the purpose of solving problems in a given structure or can critically question the very perspective of the structure. The positivist theories can be associated with problem-solving theories in a particular historical setting, enables us to raise the questions such as, in case of sanction, what are the logic of sanctions? Are they successful? How do sanctions operate in, or what is their mechanism? Why do sanctions work in some cases, not in other cases? This approach does not question the prevailing social and power relationships. Its strength lies in its ability to reduce a problem statement into limited variables and arrive at a certain statement of general laws. Whereas to look sanction from a critical perspective is to broaden the scope of asking new questions. By interrogating the process and parameters of a given perspective, the critical approach enables us to question very assumptions, such as, are economic sanctions merely a foreign policy tool to ensure national interest? If economic sanctions were to act as a norm enforcers, how did those norms originate and evolve? Are smart sanctions really smart? Employing a critical approach, it is argued that sanctions are one of the many forms of ideational and material exclusion. Now I will come to the literature review. As geopolitical realities changed around the late 1980s, political interest in economic sanction scholarship grew optimistically. Broadly, two prominent strands of scholarship around economic sanction in IR can be identified. The first strand being the logic of sanction. It was in the response to desperate need of policymakers to know whether economic sanction can be foreign policy measure means to ensure political ends. The second concern was the mechanism, to know the mechanism in which the supposed sanction will work. The task was to explore the mechanism through which the economic sanctions target the transmission belt of socio-political arteries and veins of the targeted country. So coming to the logic part, The relative success of economic sanction against South Africa led to question and revise the traditional pessimism around economic sanction. The imperial studies on the sanction known as HSC dataset by Peterson Institute of International Studies, first of its kind in form of quantitative study, compiled 116 cases of sanction from 1919 to 1990. The findings showed that success rate of the economic sanction was 34%, much higher than the conventional understanding. Later on, this study was scrutinized and many have questioned its method and framework and high success rate. The second strand, mechanism of sanction. The question of whether economic sanction will work or not presupposes an important answer to an important question, which is how they will work. The underlying causation suggested by most of the analysis is simple: economic pain will translate into political gain. However, way back in 1967, John Galtung analyzing economic sanction against Rhodesia dismissed this simple naive theory of sanction. The naivety comes when policymakers assume that applying economic pressure will automatically result into political compliance, directly or indirectly. Galtung emphasized the socio-economic transmission belt through which economic sanctions circulate and impact the target. While the existing literature around the topic informs the instrumental understanding of economic sanction, most of it is situated in the positivist approach of the mainstream theories. Several implications can be drawn from the existing scholarship. First being that this narrow and historical understanding overlooks the possibility that evolution of economic sanction is the story of negotiation between the target and sanction imposer. Second, at the methodological level, the historical portrayal of economic sanction as a modern European innovation is to assert all the fallacies associated with the Eurocentrism itself. And finally, conceptually, economic sanctions are presented distinct from trade war and economic warfare. In doing so, economic sanctions are detached from their colonial flavor, discounting historical normative concerns vis-a-vis imperialism, slavery, and colonial violence. Now I'll come to the case study. In the case of China, I have analyzed two distinct but related phases of technological denial. First being the imperial form of denial through the early trademark regimes in the late 19th century, and the second being targeting China through the modern technological sanction. Imperial form of sanction. The economic statecraft of the imperial powers derived their economic hegemony by securing commercial rights through intellectual and private property regimes in the peripheries. The interesting Chinese copycat case of alleged violations of trademark and brand recipes of Borrow, Welcome and Company's cosmetic cream. Eugenia Lean explores the interaction of imperial commercial manufacturers in the metropole and alleged Chinese adapters of the imperial brands and recipes in the 19th century. These interactions were situated in the context where imperial manufacturers were negotiating the emerging global trademark regimes with peripheral local actors. Through the web of newly emerged trademark regimes, a distinct category of pure scientific knowledge was constructed to serve the commercial interest of those imperial firms such as Borrow, Welcome and Company. Local Chinese adapters were not simply the passive recipient of these emerging regimes, but were also actively instrumental in spreading what they call common scientific knowledge in colonial peripheries such as in China to ensure a market for the product. The common aspect of the common knowledge refer to sharing of knowledge without brand ownership or trademark. The spread of common scientific knowledge was essential in imperial peripheries to create new markets and introduce new product to the people. Simultaneously, these imperial firms worked with the government to erect trademark regimes which secured their commercial interest. This dichotomous treatment of the scientific knowledge was necessitated when common knowledge proliferation was free from enclosing and thus served the internalizing global capitalist norms. whereas pure scientific knowledge was enclosed into trademark regime to secure commercial interests over peripheries. Now the second part, modern US sanction against China. So we can understand the US sanction against China in distinct three phases. The US imposed the first phase of economic sanction against China in 1951 following the Korean War crisis, which were effective until the normalization of US-China relation in 1972. The US and China resumed bilateral trade only after signing the Shanghai Communique. The first phase of the UN sanction against China was not very effective. It drove China to adopt diversification of its trade and technological exchange relations. China faced with the second phase of economic sanction at a time when realm of the economic sanction was itself evolving. Various multilateral export control regimes were put in place to control technological aspect of dual-use export, including military goods and missile technologies. In this phase, China was targeted with three categories of sanction. First category of sanction was multilateral sanction led by the US in the form of arrangements such as Wassenaar arrangement of export control on dual technologies. China was a proscribed country on the Coordinated Committee on Multilateral Export Control list, COCOM list, which was replaced by Wassenaar arrangement in 1994. The second category was the sanction approved by the US export control laws and regulation applied to China along with other countries. The Export Administration Act 1979 authorized the Department of Commerce to aggregate a commerce control list for the dual-use item. Similarly, the Department of State was authorized to target munition items under the Arms Export Control Act. Under these legislation, China was prohibited from acquiring satellite and high-performance computer technology and other dual-use items. The final categories include the US sanction against China apart from these. Okay, sir. Yeah. So under the last category, China was denied nuclear trade and cooperation despite having an agreement between the US and China over the peaceful use of nuclear energy in 1985. The US imposed sanction on computing technology, placing China as a tier 3 country considering national security concerns. The third phase of the sanction against China can be seen in the form of US-China trade war. Since 2017, US has shifted its defensive approach from defensive to an offensive concerning technological exchange with China. This shift was a result of Washington's response to a rise of China as an economic, technological and geopolitical power. The US perceived China's military-civil fusion strategy as enabled by the transfer of technology through American corporations. The Bureau of Industry and Security has identified 14 core technologies that need to be controlled considering the US national interest. Also central to the US-China trade war were the Chinese unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft according to the American narrative. The US has constantly persuaded China to reform its domestic IPR standard. Since the 1990s, IPR concerns have been at the forefront of the US-China trade conflict. The Bush administration designated China in the list of 103 provision of Omnibus Trade and Competitiveness Act. Situating the US-China in this setting, China's aggressive stand against the US-sponsored IPR norms is informed by the North-South divide. The third phase of the sanction is critical to the central argument of the paper, where sanctions serve as a means to exclude China from developing technological capabilities. Apart from export-import controls, American insistence on targeting the sites of key technological innovation through the IPR regime reveals the politics of sanction. To equate this sanction merely to the US national interest is to ignore the structural exclusionary mechanisms through which the global... Yes, this is the last. So I'll conclude the presentation. Conceptually, the discussion around the topic should be broadened to accommodate not only the normative concern around the historical experiences, but also to contextualize and situate the sanction in the global economic inequality and north-south divide. Concepts such as economic warfare and trade war cannot be seen in isolation from the entirety of economic sanctions. The problem-solving approach cannot take us further without conceiving critical elements. The existing theoretical assumption around the sanctions serve the purpose of those who are deploying these tools. There is a pressing need to accommodate the increasing concern from the global south by questioning our existing framework and assumption. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So all of you would agree that it really had been a very interesting session. And I still reiterate to the fact that all these four young scholars really have taken very complex topic for their research. And these are the areas where the rest of the world also has been eyeing on, the way China has been unfolding in these many sectors with a greater focus on critical minerals and semiconductors that speaks volume about China's aspiration. China certainly, what I will do in the next 5 to 10 minutes is to just locate China and see that how they really got evolved in science and technological area. Advances in science and technology in China, if one really tries to understand, it really had been, it really had seen or witnessed a very good journey because they really came up with a very large, focused, well-defined systematic plan. And it happened only because of certain geopolitical crises which China had experienced during the decade of 50s. One was the Korean War and the second was the Taiwan state crisis. Mao himself had taken the lead in terms of defining what China needs and the way, in fact, he addressed to the members of Politburo when he said that China cannot afford to get bullied by either of the power blocks. That really was a significant development which saw the birth of their strategic program with a focus on the nuclear program, ballistic missile program, and the outer space program. The decade of 50s, again, was very tumultuous for China, both 50s and 60s, not because of the beginning of these programs, but also the challenges which they were seeing in terms of establishing their relationship with both the power blocks. And that could not really saw for a longer period. The continuity was not seen for a longer period, and that challenge again was being felt. But at the same time, by then what had happened that their scientific community really had got trained by the Soviet Union, and they were able to really understand that how best they could really move ahead in terms of achieving those capabilities which were needed at that given point in time. And most of the ballistic missiles which they have now were the byproduct of their effort which they had put in the decade of 60s despite the Cultural Revolution. And one now sees that how they really focused mostly in achieving the intercontinental ballistic missile, where they take pride in saying that they can target any part of the United States. We have been following their delivery system capabilities with a greater interest because we would like to validate the technical characteristics of the missile. It's not that we have to take their declaration on the face value. We are working in a team in terms of understanding their capabilities, and we are trying to validate each of their missile testing with regard to the consistency in the payload and the range. So that is one part. Second part, the decade of 60s saw them again becoming a nuclear weapon state. And the focus that point in time was how best the nation states could really have strategic advantages in achieving ISR capabilities. And that China really was taking the lead. Mao died in 1976. Deng Xiaoping takes over. In 1978, they announced two programs. One was the strategic modernization program, and second was the market economy, the open market economy. In the strategic modernization program, they again had a very clear idea what they would like to do. It's not that that has been stopped, it really is continuing. And the focus basically had been to improve their capabilities in sea-based assets and the air-based assets. You can see that what they have achieved in the sea-based assets, they have a good set of aircraft carrier capability. They have a good set of nuclear-powered submarine, that Julang 21. I think that is something which we have to really understand that how they really have achieved this. The 21st century has really witnessed a different China altogether. They had made a strong foundation. through their innovative practices. It's, as I said, that it's not only innovative practices, they learned many things from the Soviet Union. They worked very closely with the United States. Most of the capabilities which they got, obviously, were borrowed ones. It's not that they have developed. And not only that, they also achieved mastery in reverse engineering. I remember 2 missiles which they had got from Soviet Union. One was R1 and R2. The replica of that was done by China in the form of Dongfeng 1 and Dongfeng 2. The current era really has seen China, a different China altogether. They would like to see how best they emerge as one of the dominant powers in the critical minerals area, because they are very focused. They would like to see that how, through their capabilities, they could be seen as one of these major powers in the world. And that is happening now. 70% of critical minerals in the current context are owned by China, and that is something which is very significant. If you map the development of critical minerals in China and try to really segregate, like if you take cobalt, copper, and lithium, and try to see what they have done the last 10 years, you will find amazing answers in terms of what they have done. If you take, again, other part of the critical minerals like nickel, silicon, and zirconium, they again have been able to achieve, significant development China has witnessed in these areas. As far as their semiconductor industry is concerned, I think that also has grown many times. The way they really envisage, I think that has gone much beyond their expectations and the world's expectations. Despite sanctions, they really have achieved primacy in many of these areas. The US understands very well that sanctions have always produced counterproductive results. Even if they have understood that technological sanctions which they keep imposing will make the nation more self-reliant, as had happened in the case of India also. The sanctions did not work. And likewise, as was highlighted by one of the speakers with regard to the sanctions which they imposed in the early part of 50s, and the way, in fact, China really did a lot of work in the strategic areas, I think that was speaking high about China's overall understanding of these many critical capabilities. The decade of this first decade of this century again has really been significant, because they were able to harmonize their export control laws with the international standard, so that they could work with the rest of the world in a manner by which they could really achieve primacy in many of these strategic areas. If, as a researcher, as a young researcher, if you would like to know about China in many of these areas, I would really recommend and urge all of you to do a comprehensive exercise in knowing about their strategic infrastructure. Where are they located? What exactly they have been doing? We have done that for the government. We have mapped their strategic areas. We have gone to the extent of doing a work on their human resource, that what type of persons really have been working. And that is something which is very significant. So if you would like to map their strategic resources, a strategic infrastructure, a strategic capabilities, you will find that they really have gone ahead, and the world basically really has been eyeing on China. It is not, the debate should not take place on China versus the rest. The debate should take place how the rest of the world can learn from China and move ahead. Because right now what I see happening wherever I go in the seminar, that debate really centers around China versus the rest. And that perhaps is not a good premise. The premise should be how best we can learn from China, how best we can really imbibe certain good practices, especially in terms of timeliness. India is, and the comparison between India and China certainly is totally not desirable, for the simple reason that India's requirements are different than China's requirement. And India's practices, India's working, in fact, I was doing one assessment again on their different academies, and those academies which are working on strategic areas. And I found that one academy, which is the third academy, which does on liquid propellant system, that headquarters is in Beijing. 27,000 scientists work in that academy. Likewise, the fourth academy, which does solid propellant system, a lot of these Dongfeng 21 missiles that is built there, it is in Inner Mongolia, that is in Hohhot. They have 18,000 scientists working in that. If you ask me what is India doing, DRDO, which does our land-based assets and sea-based assets and air-based assets, there are 52 laboratories across India, and there are only 5,000 scientists working. So you can imagine the type of human resource which China has been using and the type of human resource which India has been using is totally different. So we shall not really be comparing with regard to that what India has done in this area and what China has done. So most of the presentation which really has been made, and I had the privilege of going through all the 4 papers, I think these papers really have brought out some of these important areas which really will give us idea that how China really has been navigating their plan in terms of achieving those capabilities which could really give a distinct edge to China, and how best they could use that edge in terms of evolving certain strategy which could make China as an acceptable player in the international system. China basically right now wants acceptance by the rest of the world. And that is something which is missing from the larger global horizon. So I think all the 4 papers obviously were well presented, and obviously there is always a scope of improvement. It's nothing that one can really say that now my research is completed. Research basically remains dynamic. So obviously you will have to really go back and see that how best you can improve upon that. I'm sure that these are some of your PhD areas. It's not that you are just doing for some other paper. It's your PhD area. So I think we have some 10 to 50 minutes. We can really engage with all the 4 speakers and see that how best we can really learn from each other. Yes.
I'm Deepak Maheshwari. So my question is related to the critical minerals which was mentioned. So one is whether we should not start thinking about critical materials rather than just critical minerals per se. Obviously minerals are something that lead to materials, but just as a conceptual framework. But more importantly, if you look at within India, a couple of years back we had this big news about big find of lithium deposits in a village in Jammu. And whatever the government has come out with the exploration, etc., there have not been any takers for those type of things. So are we just jumping ahead of ourselves in this domain, or should we do some things in a slightly different manner? Thank you.
This is a general question, or whom you have asked this question?
So basically Shalini and Nikhil, I mean, these are the 2 who had talked about critical minerals. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, we'll take a couple of more in the first round. Please. Yes, please. Give the microphone to him. Oh, sorry, to her.
I have a question to Megha. Like, since we're talking about semiconductors, we can't really leave behind Taiwan in it. So, as China is still not self-sufficient in semiconductor industry, and it heavily dependent on Taiwan for its imports, so how do we factor in Taiwan in the geopolitical contestation, since you even talked about American export control? Thank you.
One more for this first round. Yeah, excuse me. Achha, yeah.
Hello. Okay.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Hello. I am Satyam, a second-year DGIR student. So, as of my understanding, India's one of the main problem of a green transition is if we are making a green transition too fast, our dependence on China for the critical minerals or many kinds of green products will increase. So the dependency, increasing the dependency is not a good thing. So what can be the panel's policy prescriptions for government? What can be the policy prescriptions for a government to minimize this dependency? I think in last month, government also tried to sell some, to just auction some critical minerals blocks, but there were no takers other than the public sector companies. So this is my question: what can we do to make the self-reliance? Thank you.
So, sir, please.
This is just a general comment, and I endorse your view that a lot many things are there to learn from China, including the way China was trying to develop its technology. It all starts with the export control regimes that were erected by the US and its allies after World War II. China was part of the dual containment strategy of the United States. And later when China opened up, how China sent hundreds, probably thousands of students to the US and let them work in laboratories and universities and learn things related to technology is something that we should learn from China. Secondly, how China managed to be part of the export control regimes. Of course, India did much later, but the way China was signed the NPT and then part of MTCR, then other nuclear suppliers group, these are the diplomatic aspect of evolution of China's ability to harness technology from other countries. American companies, including the space companies, were coming and launching satellites within China. It's only when China was perceived as a threat, the American government asked the American companies not to launch satellites in China. Because one of the strategies of China was, as part of signing a contract with the companies, technology transfer, where China was much better than India and other countries in getting technology while offering them a lot of benefits within China. When we were perceiving MNCs to be an economic threat, China was opening up more and more to the foreign companies. There's another area one should learn the skill from the Chinese. So I just endorse your point. That's why I thought it is, let me highlight this.
Thank you very much. I think I didn't touch upon the multilateral export control regimes. That's a different story altogether. China basically was never adhering to many of these regimes which were coming up. China perhaps was the last among all the 5 nuclear weapon states to become a part of NPT. China became a part of NPT in the year 1992. China delayed in terms of becoming a part of NSG. China was not a part of COCOM for a longer period of time. And obviously it became a part of Wassenaar, I don't know, few years back. And then again, Australia group, it had his own reservation. So if you see all these, the way China basically came up in terms of not only getting the technology from elsewhere in the world, but also how best they could use their technology to help their partners. China-Pakistan nexus was built when China was not a part of NPT. So if you want goes back and sees China's overall strategy in the decade of 70s and 80s is very significant for understanding that what they were up to. Yes, I think second round you can come. Second round you can go. So you want to answer, some of you want to answer, or otherwise I will also address. Please go ahead.
Hello? Yeah. So the first question on minerals or materials. So like I've already mentioned that for example iron or steel is also a material, but it is not as critical as, let's say, lithium, because there's already a lot of production. India is one of the major producers. So in terms of the criticality of the supply chain, you cannot really securitize everything and work on everything at once. So in that sense, we've identified only 30 critical minerals which are crucial for the energy transition or the future industries. That makes it easy for us to set goals and work. So that is something that everyone does. And on the question of dependency on China, it is a fact that the world has to accept. That it is in a bad position because these are some of the strategic industries, but we also have to see that we have to meet our goals of climate change till 2030. So by 2030, you cannot really, it takes a 10-year period to really set up and produce and process such minerals. So we have to really look at this from a for the whole of humanity rather than just of national security, so that cooperation with China becomes imperative. Let it be for anyone.
You'd like to say something, Megha?
To answer Swati's question that is related to factoring in Taiwan, yes, because of its sophisticated foundry model, both China and USA is dependent on TSMC. In fact, 2 weeks ago, there was news that TSMC has stopped its taking orders from Huawei, and then there are ripples in the industry that what again Huawei will do. So that is one of the examples that how Huawei is Huawei and HiSilicon is dependent on Taiwan. When we see Taiwan, we do not only see China and Taiwan, but also USA comes into the picture. Personally, I think there are three main reasons why TSMC is not the ultimate factor behind reunification or invasion. First is that the supply chain TSMC is a great factor in the supply chain, but not the only one. Even if China gets TSMC, they are ultimately dependent on the US for design. Secondly, a few months back there was a news that Netherlands ASML has come up with a remote switch, using which they can disable machines that they have already exported to China. So if that happens, disabling equipment machines that TSMC or for that matter China might have, this particular factor might not be very useful for China to acquire Taiwan and then to take advantages further. Third, it has now greater engagement with the USA. For example, recent Arizona factory in the Phoenix city. So these are the engagement that how China is diversifying its supply chain, also towards USA. And if any invasion or unification happens and TSMC comes into hands of Taiwan, then forfeiting of its American business and other businesses would be difficult. So this diversification is also key to how Taiwan or TSMC is having its greater relevance. Thank you.
Sir, I would like to answer the first question.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir asked about the critical material and how to, I don't remember the question actually, how to have the access to it or how to make it accessible more. So, as I mentioned in my paper, that China has the control over the production as well as the processing in the critical mineral sector. So, if a country which is rapidly developing, like India, has discovered lithium resources, it is kind of a responsibility of India also to engage in fruitful or successful collaboration to process these resources or develop a technology to process that resource, and if possible share those resources with other countries also. That will kind of help those countries to reduce their reliance on China, and it will also make India a part of the supply chain. And also, in case of underdeveloping countries, in case they have the resources of critical minerals and they are relying on China for the extraction and processing, they shouldn't and they must refrain from blindly going into an agreement with China and threatening their own environment by giving China access to these resources. So that's my answer. Thank you.
So I think one more thing we can take. I think you wanted to say something. Yeah, go ahead. Might you have to use because this is used.
So, sir, my question is to you, to the chair. Since we are discussing about critical minerals and lithium has brought into the picture, we have seen that how China is playing its tech diplomacy in Latin American region and how it has already invested heavily in all three lithium triangle countries. So, how does it impact the geopolitics by and large, and how United States of America looks at it and its policy towards the same?
Thank you for discussing the tea. I think it's a good question. Yeah, please go ahead. Last one. It's a very good question.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Subhash. Your paper is focusing on US, part of the story on sanctions on China. Have you also dealt with, how China is then maneuvering or inoculating itself from those sanctions, be it about the unreliable foreign entities, legislation, or the extraterritorial foreign legislation, anti-extraterritorial foreign legislations, or some such measures that have come out in the past 2-3 years? Are you also looking at them? What's the complete picture?
Just add to that, Subhash, I found your paper really quite interesting in terms of the framework that you constructed to examine the efficacy of sanctions, origins, efficacy, the very purpose, and so on. Now, the Chinese have also got a discourse out there. So one part is their discourse. They have taken a position against sanctions as one of the measures that violate norms. And that attributed to US unilateralism. So one is, what is their discourse on the whole idea, concept of sanctions, and two, what is the position? So one part is the discourse and the other is the measures that they have taken. So that could, I think, add more value to your paper. Thank you.
Dr. Subha, these are all suggestions for your improvement.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to the first three speakers, and because you were talking about geopolitics of technology and infrastructure, etc. But I was actually want to nudge you on the human resource part of how this technology is about, because we are forgetting the the most important critical of this, the whole technology itself. So I just want to listen to your comments if you have time, and to Subhas. Definitely, as Professor Alka said, but I want to nudge you there on are we trying to look into sanctioning against individuals, institutions? Because you also see China, having a reverse kind of why is certain individuals are being targeted? Because the older and the present generation of sanctions are different. You would see that. So what's the departure in that? It's just individual states, entities, civil society organizations. So I think that would really help us.
I think it's a very relevant question, that a study on the human resources working in a strategic infrastructure in China is very essential to understand their background and why some of them are targeted. It's a very good suggestion. So ladies and gentlemen, I think it really had been a very interesting session. Because of paucity of time, I was told to conclude this session by 10:30. Please join me in thanking all these panelists. And now we'll break for the tea. It seems that we have a tea now, tea break, and we'll resume again.
Thank you, panelists, for your insightful inputs. It was truly an enlightening discussion. I now request Dr. Chari to please present a token of appreciation to the panelists. I now request the speakers and the chair to please gather for a group photo.